There are individuals whose cruelty and refined brutality set them apart even among the most hardened criminals. This story is about such creatures who hide their monstrous nature behind a human face. Some people are naturally drawn to adventurous experiences. However, when this thirst for danger takes someone far from familiar surroundings, they risk encountering the most aggressive elements of society, sometimes stumbling upon real monsters. Fate brought Chris Farmer and Petta Frampton together when they were 14 years old, still in school. This fateful meeting marked the beginning of their unbreakable bond. The girl's balanced temperament perfectly complemented her boyfriend's impulsive nature, and their relationship developed gradually and consciously. Understanding the need to create a solid foundation for their future married life, the couple decided to wait until after completing their university education before tying the knot. Their life principles were perfectly aligned. Before starting a family, they needed to achieve financial independence and material stability. Chris firmly held to this position, convinced that a family should be built on a solid financial foundation, and Petta fully shared his views. Both were noted for their sociability and zest for life. They were regular guests at lively celebrations and various social events. At just 10 years old, Chris had decided to dedicate himself to medical science and become a doctor. This goal determined his entire life path. At 25, Chris completed his medical training, earning his long-desired diploma. His beloved graduated with a law degree at 21. The young couple came from the small English village of Chorlton-cum-Hardy near Manchester. Chris's family was large. Besides him, his parents raised 2 more sons and a daughter. Through persistence and determination, the couple achieved financial independence from their families, gaining recognition in their chosen professions and securing a comfortable standard of living. Their passion for travel led the young couple to visit various European countries, exotic destinations like Morocco, and many other places around the globe. In December 1977, the young man and his girlfriend left their homeland, beginning an extended round-the-world journey. This was how they planned to celebrate their professional achievements and consider their future plans. For approximately 6 months, the couple traveled across the Australian continent, admiring the natural landscapes and immersing themselves in local culture. Their route then took them to the Pacific Islands, along the western coast of the United States, with plans to conclude their journey in picturesque Belize. Chris meticulously documented every stage of their journey through diary entries and video recordings. Gradually, a substantial archive of impressions formed, capturing the unique episodes of their adventure. The recorded materials were regularly sent to relatives along with letters, giving loved ones the opportunity to vicariously experience Chris's adventures despite the great distance. On June 13, 1978, the families of Chris and Petta received another letter. The lovers announced they had met an American sailor, yacht Captain Duane Boston, who had invited the young couple on a short Caribbean sailing trip along the coast. The offer seemed like a wonderful opportunity to combine business with pleasure, as part of the journey would take place in open waters, and Chris had been passionate about sailing since childhood. The young man enthusiastically described their new friend Captain Duane Boston, whose vessel carried 2 boys, his sons Vince and Russell. According to the plan, the sea voyage would last 14 days, so the next letter was expected to arrive later than usual. However, much more time passed before relatives heard from the couple again, and anxiety began to grow. The journey shouldn't have posed any difficulties for Chris and Petta, as they had considerable experience with various challenges, and Chris possessed extensive sailing knowledge. From childhood, he had mastered his favorite pastime, repeatedly crossing small bodies of water in his own boat. Captain Duane Boston jokingly called himself an authentic Caribbean pirate, and this description proved far more accurate than it initially seemed. According to the man, he made his living transporting passengers on his own yacht, approximately 30 feet long. Days aboard passed eventfully and interestingly. Most of the time was spent actively, fishing, exploring beaches and dense tropical jungles. Discovering new places, the young people were in high spirits, cherishing every moment together. As the cruise neared its end, the captain was to deliver the travelers to a point from where they planned to continue their journey, visiting a series of new locations. In one of the letters sent during the voyage, Chris shared his impressions of the vessel's owner, noting his excessive strictness. The captain's sons performed most of the ship's work, unconditionally obeying their father's will and receiving harsh punishments for even the smallest mistakes, in Duane Boston's opinion. This was exactly the kind of upbringing, he believed, that formed true masculine character and experienced sailors. Such methods fundamentally contradicted Chris and Petta's life principles, and they were shocked by such harshness. But the young couple had no alternative, so they hoped to endure the 2-week period without conflicts aboard. Later, Captain Boston's son recalled that initially the sea voyage proceeded relatively peacefully, resembling an ordinary cruise. But gradually the atmosphere began to deteriorate due to the vessel's cramped quarters and periodic minor misunderstandings. Tension gradually reached its peak when the adult participants began feeling mutual antipathy. Even the children constantly quarreled over trifles due to their father's cruelty, expressed in physical punishments and public humiliation. On June 29, 1978, Chris sent his parents another message, informing them of a route adjustment. They had decided to end the sea voyage early and disembarked in the Guatemalan city of Livingston. From there, Petta planned to fly urgently to New Orleans, while Chris intended to reach Trinidad on his own. Characterizing life on Duane's yacht, the young man expressed growing dissatisfaction. Above all, he was irritated by the limited deck space, which made privacy impossible. The constant presence of the crew, especially the crude captain, created an atmosphere of tension and discomfort. Despite everything, the group continued moving from island to island. It was on June 29 that the captain anchored near another island. Around noon, the crew went ashore, heading to an old pier where a folk festival was taking place. The celebration lifted everyone's spirits thanks to delicious barbecue and abundant alcoholic beverages. The entire company gave themselves over to the festivities, which became the last joyful episode before the tragic finale. The following days were characterized by the young travelers' alarming silence, causing concern among their relatives. Petta also sent letters to her family. The girl's last message also contained complaints about the tense atmosphere aboard the vessel. Duane constantly criticized his sons, expressing dissatisfaction over the smallest details. The girl found his character unbearable and the environment difficult to endure. Unfortunately, shortly after correspondence with Chris's family ceased, letters from Petta stopped arriving as well. The exact circumstances of subsequent events could not be established. The situation was complicated by the imperfect communication methods of the time. The parents learned that Guatemala was experiencing an active phase of civil conflict at that time. Although Livingston was away from the main conflict zones, the mere presence of foreigners in the region created heightened danger. The territory was saturated with criminal formations. Trafficking in illegal goods was the main source of income. This information raised numerous concerns and doubts about the young couple's fate. The impenetrable Guatemalan jungles provided an ideal place for capturing and concealing the bodies of random travelers. If tourists were kidnapped by local gangs, the probability of finding them became minimal. Moreover, getting lost in the forest wilderness meant almost certain death, especially for an unprepared traveler. Chris and Petta's relatives, gripped by anxiety, launched a large-scale search operation to determine the young couple's whereabouts. Numerous official letters and requests were sent to various institutions in Central American countries, from municipal administrations to government agencies, from correctional facilities to law enforcement structures, from morgues to medical centers. However, all efforts proved futile. The anxious waiting turned into real horror when no word came from the young people for many months. Understanding the critical nature of the situation, the families decided to hire a private investigator who worked in Belize. The specialist immediately began the investigation and made contact with a religious figure from Guatemala. Alarming information came from him. The previous summer, 2 unidentified human bodies had been discovered near that area, a young man and woman of European descent. There was a significant probability that these were Chris and Petta. The last hopes for a simple postal delay vanished forever. On August 1, 1978, local fishermen made a terrible discovery. On the seashore, approximately 600 feet from the coast, two bodies were found that had fallen victim to an extremely brutal crime. The victims' limbs were tightly bound, plastic bags were placed over their heads, heavy objects were attached to the bodies to prevent them from floating, after which they were thrown into the water. The conclusion was unambiguous: deliberate murder. The autopsy revealed signs of cruel treatment and torture. Experts determined that at the moment of immersion in the water, the victims were still alive. For the families, this was a devastating blow. Intuition told them, the bodies found belonged to their children. Since the identities of the deceased remained unestablished 6 months ago, burial took place in a local Guatemalan cemetery in an anonymous grave, marked only by white crosses. Identification required exhumation and comparison with dental records from Britain. The procedure was hampered by numerous technical obstacles and the local administration's indifference. Bureaucratic red tape created additional barriers. After a long period of persistent attempts, they finally received official confirmation: the deceased were indeed the missing Farmer and Petta Frampton. From then on, relatives were tormented by a single question: who could have committed such a horrible crime against their children? The young people had reputations as balanced and friendly individuals, with no connections to the criminal world. Relatives were unable to comprehend the motives for the murder. The search for answers yielded no results. The tragedy deeply affected members of both families, who had lost their beloved son and daughter. Continuous phone calls, petitions to diplomatic missions, journalistic publications, and law enforcement agencies also proved fruitless. The families made maximum efforts to achieve justice and activate the investigation. Chris's father never learned the truth. He passed away in 2013. In 2015, the case was taken up by Chris's 55-year-old sister. Penny revealed talents as an internet investigator and decided to uncover the truth on her own. The initial information was minimal. The only lead was the name of the vessel on which her brother had made his last sea voyage. Through tireless work, Penny managed to find traces of a person named Duane Boston, owner of the sailing vessel, Justin B. This was the very vessel that had become transport for the young couple's fatal journey. Analyzing the correspondence, the woman reconstructed important circumstances of the tragedy. Her brother and his companion had described in detail their meeting with the American sailor and his two sons, who were to become their companions on the Caribbean Odyssey. It turned out that Chris and Petta were last seen alive on the deck of the aforementioned vessel, owned by Californian Duane Boston. The last letters clearly demonstrated negative attitudes and a conflict atmosphere regarding the yacht captain. Duane became the main suspect, although there was no irrefutable evidence of his guilt. Penny had a brilliant idea. Several years earlier, she had created a fake social media profile to discreetly monitor her own son's activities. At the time, it seemed like a reasonable step for parental control. Now there was an opportunity to use this profile for another purpose. To clarify the details of the tragedy connected to Duane, the woman decided to find his adult sons Vince and Russell, assuming their possible involvement in the double crime. Using the fake account, she found the brothers' pages on social platforms. At the time of the crime, the boys were 12 and 13 years old respectively. Now they were grown men with whom communication could be established. The dialogue began with a direct question. She stated her knowledge of the tragic events and desire to clarify the circumstances of her loved ones' deaths. One brother ignored the contact attempt. The second showed willingness for a more detailed conversation. Gradually it emerged that both brothers were experiencing deep psychological trauma from past events and felt sincere remorse for that terrible day. According to Vince, his father was a real tyrant. He abused alcohol, showed cruelty, and terrorized those around him. One day, while intoxicated, he completely lost control and committed a double murder right on the yacht's deck. He took the lives of Chris and Petta. The memories of those moments had traumatized Vince's psyche so deeply that they were forever etched in his consciousness. For many years, he was haunted by nightmares. Under the influence of his conversation with the woman, Duane's eldest son finally understood the need to free himself from the heavy burden of the past. On an October morning in 2015, he went to the Sacramento police station and gave law enforcement a detailed description of the crime. The detectives took the testimony with due seriousness. They carefully analyzed archival documents related to the 37-year-old case. Coordinated work between British and American law enforcement allowed them to accumulate substantial evidence. Finally, in spring 2016, official charges of double murder were brought against sailboat owner Duane Boston. Vince testified that he personally witnessed the crime, as did his younger brother. He provided a detailed description of events. First, the captain brutally tortured Chris, forcibly stripped him, and tied his upper and lower limbs. After this, he attached several heavy auto parts found on board to his body. The living and defenseless person was thrown overboard. Despite the children's desperate attempts, powerless to resist the adult man, soon piercing female screams came from the cabin where the girl was held. After some time, Petta suffered the same fate as her companion. There was, of course, no possibility of escape. Recalling past years, Vince spoke painfully about the atmosphere of domestic terror that reigned in their family. Instead of normal childhood activities, soccer or bike rides, their father forced the boys to participate in thefts and robberies, trying to raise them as accomplices for criminal activities. The brothers resisted their father's will, for which they regularly suffered cruel punishments. Vince felt relief that after decades of silence, he was finally heard and believed. In the online investigation initiated by Penny, Vince played a crucial role as a direct witness to the crime. At first, he was afraid to share these memories even with his younger brother, who had also been present at the murder. After committing the crime, the yachtsman strictly ordered them to remain silent about what they had seen, threatening death if they turned to law enforcement. He convinced the children that he had been forced to eliminate the young people because they supposedly could have reported his illegal activities to authorities. The criminal emphasized that no one tolerates informants and promised the same fate to anyone who dared reveal the truth. The ruthless despot managed to subjugate the will of the young children, creating hellish living conditions for them. The victims lacked the courage to speak out against him even in adulthood. Later, the eldest son tried several times to contact law enforcement. However, each of his appeals was either rejected by investigators or considered unreliable. At first, Penny viewed the accused sons as likely accomplices to the murder. Later, she concluded that they too had become victims of the domestic tyrant, having lived long years in an atmosphere of fear and helplessness. The children became hostages to the situation, and the tragic fate of Chris and Petta was sealed the moment they boarded the vessel. The investigation later revealed that the criminal had lured them onto the vessel by presenting the journey as a romantic sea adventure with promises of exclusively pleasant experiences. The initial days of the journey were indeed quite comfortable. The young couple enjoyed the ocean expanses, explored remote coastal areas, and admired natural landscapes. However, reality proved much darker than the attractive promises. It turned out that the seemingly friendly Captain Duane Boston was actually an experienced criminal hiding from justice. Taking his children with him, he was trying to avoid prosecution for serious crimes, including sexual assault committed in California. The fugitive criminal saw convenient victims in the young travelers. He planned in advance to reach a remote bay where he could seize the travelers' valuables and money without witnesses. Further investigation into the criminal's history revealed that the tragic fate of Chris and Petta was likely not an isolated case of violence by Duane Boston. Before this, he had been the central figure in the case of his wife Mary Lou's mysterious disappearance. The woman vanished without a trace immediately after announcing her intention to divorce and take the children with her. The killer's son Vince recounted that his mother left home in 1968 when he was only 3 years old and his brother was 2, and never returned. Their father convinced them that their mother had abandoned the children herself. The brothers struggled with the loss of their beloved mother, remaining under the care of their cruel father. Over the years, Vince concluded that his father, who had proven capable of killing 2 strangers, could very well have fatally harmed his own wife. His parents likely assisted him in this by purchasing the sailing vessel, Justin B., for him. Moreover, the father had serious motivation to eliminate his wife, unwillingness to go through a complicated divorce procedure, divide joint property, transfer custody of the children, and pay alimony. The grandmother shared with her grandsons that Duane had confessed to her that he shot his wife in the back and then hid the body somewhere. Mary Lou has still not been found. Subsequently, his involvement in the murder remained unproven due to lack of evidence. The brothers repeatedly tried to clarify the details of their mother's death. However, their father constantly avoided conversations on this topic. Once, while heavily intoxicated, the man cruelly punished the children for asking about their mother. From then on, they were afraid to raise the issue. Vince and Russell's childhood and teenage years passed in an atmosphere of constant threat. Their father, who suffered from regular alcoholic binges, became an aggressive and unpredictable despot, ready to vent his rage on his own children. Duane posed a real danger, constantly yelling at the boys, finding reasons for conflict. For them, this sea voyage became one of the most horrific experiences of their lives. The children constantly feared they might face the same fate as Chris and Petta. Usually, Duane organized short one-day fishing excursions for vacationers, and only once did he risk a 2-week journey with a pair of victims. Remembering the deceased, Vince emphasized that Chris and Petta were distinguished by their kind-hearted natures and consideration for others. Every evening they dedicated all their free time to the boys, passing on new knowledge and skills. Such warm treatment evoked sincere positive feelings in the children, who had already grown unaccustomed to joyful moments after their mother's disappearance. Initially, the atmosphere on board was relatively peaceful. The presence of new passengers temporarily restrained the vessel owner's cruel character. Outwardly, Duane demonstrated hospitality, striving to make a positive impression, but gradually his mask fell, revealing the rudeness and ruthlessness typical of his usual behavior. Any mistakes or failures by the children instantly provoked outbursts of anger and severe punishments. For a long period, Chris and Petta preferred not to interfere in parenting matters, listening to Duane's reasoning about the necessity of a harsh approach to teaching children. They didn't want to interfere in other people's family affairs. However, tension gradually increased. A serious problem was the absolute isolation in the limited space of the compact yacht, where it was impossible to find solitude or avoid children's crying and the captain's continuous pressure. One evening, the captain got drunk again. Duane attacked his own sons and began beating them mercilessly. The vessel owner's behavior provoked Chris's protest, who openly condemned such treatment of children. Under the influence of alcohol, Duane responded with aggression, trying to hit the passenger, but Chris dodged, and the attacker flew overboard. After being helped back on deck, the captain felt deep indignation and hatred toward Chris. The next morning, the lovers expressed their intention to leave the yacht, disembarking at the nearest shore. Instead of granting the request, the criminal attacked the young man from behind, using the moment when he wasn't ready. The first strong blow led to loss of consciousness. After this, he tied up the young man and began striking him in the chest area. Then Duane went down to the lower deck, where he attacked Petta and beat her, likewise tying up her body. The day turned into a series of tortures for the passengers, who were subjected to various forms of abuse. 2 teenagers who became witnesses observed the events. The boys faced a difficult choice: try to help the couple, exposing themselves to mortal danger, or preserve their own lives. Frightened and confused, the children proved unable to change the course of events. The girl was filled with thoughts about her future fate and cursed the criminals. Chris and Petta demonstrated courage and endurance, refusing to show weakness before their tormentor. The next morning, the yacht owner announced news that initially gave everyone hope. According to his claim, they would soon reach shore and be freed from their bonds. Hope instantly turned to disappointment when he took the yacht a significant distance from land and mockingly laughed at them. He pulled plastic bags over the lovers' heads, tied their hands and feet, and then threw the couple to the ocean floor. From then on, the investigative agencies faced the task of finding the killer. It turned out that after committing the crime, Duane left Guatemalan territorial waters on July 19, having only himself and his sons on board. After returning to California, he immediately sold his yacht. Contact was established with the main suspect, but he claimed he had dropped off his fellow travelers near Livingston, accusing them of using and distributing illegal substances. The man hinted that, likely in an unfamiliar country, the tourists had encountered unpredictable threats. The deceased's family categorically rejected the version of events proposed by the killer. The lovers were absolutely far from the criminal world, and this position was confirmed by Duane's sons, who actively assisted the investigation, as they were the eyewitnesses to the crime. However, arresting and punishing the criminal proved to be a complex task. For a long period, he remained beyond the reach of law enforcement. Bureaucratic obstacles significantly slowed the investigation's progress, postponing resolution of the problem indefinitely. However, achieving justice for Chris and Petta never came to pass. At the end of November 2016, when the criminal was arrested at a nursing home in California, the elderly man's health was rapidly deteriorating. While he was under arrest, in April 2017, at the age of 75, Duane Boston ended his life in custody. Medical examination revealed serious cardiovascular and liver disease. The prison hospital medical staff noted that after informing the criminal about the upcoming court hearing, he stopped following medical prescriptions and refused prescribed medications, thereby accelerating the deterioration of his condition. For the deceased's sister, Penny, this event was a manifestation of cowardice and avoidance of responsibility for what was done. In her conviction, the man deliberately chose death instead of standing trial and admitting his guilt. Chris's relatives perceived the criminal's death as an additional blow of fate that destroyed their hope for the triumph of justice. Petta's parents had already passed away without seeing this case resolved. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.